Great to be joined today by Sim Lam. Sim is the founder and CEO of Mazi People, the boutique search firm focused on people and talent leaders. Prior to Mazi, Sim was partner at Founders Keepers, a leading search firm, and before that, rose through the ranks at Michael Page. Today, Sim focuses on running CPO searches for some of Europe's leading technology and high growth businesses, as well as running the Mazi community of inspiring people and talent leaders. Welcome, Sim.
Thank you, Paddy. Appreciate being here.
Thank you very much. So, every great career's got a unique story. I'd love to hear a little bit about yours. And if you could start with your first job, what was your first job out of education?
My first job out of education, 16, was the post room of a subsidiary of Barclays.
Wow. Okay. How did you get that job?
I got it, started as I meant to go on, I guess, through connections. So I went to school with somebody whose dad happened to run and own this subsidiary. I was benefactor of lots of people who have helped me in my life and career. So even as I left home at 16, already was getting those benefits and was staying with my friend whilst I was looking for somewhere to live. She we were sat having dinner with her dad, and I told her dad that I just got a job with Gap, and I was going to go and work for Gap selling their really cool t-shirts, jumpers, hoodies that we all loved back in those days. And he said, well, that's a real shame because I was going to ask you to interview for my company. And I was like, well, your company is very serious. I think that that's something that I would love to do. And then, I won't go off on a tangent with it already, but the long story short is that I was given that opportunity. I thought I had a very difficult interview. Turns out, looking back, that his trusted EA gave me a very kind interview and made me feel like I'd earned the opportunity. I certainly did over the years after that, but essentially I got the job through somebody being kind and taking a young girl under their wing and giving them an opportunity, which I tried to reward over the years by working hard.
That's awesome. And how did your career unfold from there? So you started in the post room there, and how did it unfold? I mean, give us the abridged version, because obviously you've done so many awesome things, and you're now a founder and CEO. But would love to hear the twists and turns. And what do you think are the most pivotal moments for you in your career? Are there kind of one or two that you look back on and go, "Wow, those were, that things could have gone differently at those points"?
Yeah, 100%. I did start in the post room, and I absolutely learned how to, frank a lot of letters and get all of them out and organize all of the letters that were coming in to all the different departments. But, I say that slightly tongue in cheek because I would say the first chapter of my career was this kind of 10 years that I spent in this subsidiary of Barclays. And actually what I think, I spent the first three of those, the first 3 weeks I was in the post room, the first 3 years I spent actually in customer services and in collections. And what I got in that whole chapter was what felt like to me rotation. So I just really learned the foundations of business. I got to work in that 10 years, or I think it's, 8, 9, 10 years, something like that, but a long stint. I got to work in credit control and collections. I saw, underwriting. I worked in sales. I worked in, I saw a lot about business and how businesses work and what those different departments do to bring, whole business together, which I think gave me great perspective. Mm, And I loved it. I think the pivotal moments for me were, because that's essentially um, what I did, what got me started in my career. But I left home at 16, having been again fortunate to go from living in a council estate to going to a private school. Again, got afforded a great opportunity to have a different experience that really shaped my life. So the private school shaped my personal life, and I guess in turn shaped my career. The pivotal moments that shaped my career were, I guess, firstly that father. Sadly he has passed now, but Neville Allport, amazing guy, and did a lot for the Welsh economy and for my life. So he was the first person. The second person was the final boss that I had when I was at that subsidiary. It was called First Plus. He advised me to go into recruitment. As somebody who had been very intentional about still wanting a rewarding and fulfilling career, I was very clear that I was not going to be able to necessarily the doors weren't going to open for me just because of my academic achievements, or any of those other things that sometimes come through doing A levels, going to university and stuff. So I had to really be focused on how I was going to open up doors for myself. And that boss said to me, you should look at recruitment. It's a big industry. There's lots of opportunity, and you can really make of it whatever you put in, basically. So he was the second person. The third person, and I have to be careful not to overly inflate this guy's ego, because many people in our industry know him. But Dean Nash, who was the general counsel at Monzo when they went from like 50 people to 1,500 people, he then went to be the chief legal officer for Wise, and he's now in his next venture. But I credit him, and I will credit him with introducing me to the entrepreneurial growth phase, sort of phase of my career. From my Barclays, I kind of split my career into the kind of BR before recruitment, and then everything that came after that. And in the second phase, where I was doing sort of all versions of recruitment and talent and headhunting and search and whatever you want to call it, I've become more and more specialized. But I really credit Dean for opening my world to opening that kind of entrepreneurial, fast-paced, high growth tech, which is a space that has brought me a lot of joy, and that I get a lot of energy from. So, and he did also, I should also say that he also introduced me to the co-founder of the Mazi CPO collective, the community, Ross Seychelles, who again, many people in our world know.
Wow, awesome. Jumping in a little bit to some of the stories from your experience, can you please tell me about your favorite or perhaps the most memorable hire that you've ever been involved with?
Yeah, of course. Favorite hire. I feel like I should probably exclude my current teammates, because that would be unfair, right? So,
That's definitely cheating, yeah.
I mean, I won't sit on the fence too much. I definitely don't want to do that, but I'm gonna hold that card back, if that's all right. So there was a few years ago, or yeah, gosh, it must have been about, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago. uh, I met Jeremy Duggan, who Multiverse and many other companies before that, but everybody in the company at Multiverse at the time would talk about the 4 characteristics that he uses to hire. And they were, let me get these right: character, intelligence, coachability, and track record. So four characteristics that he looked at, or four sort of main principles that he used for hiring. So when I think about the different hires that I have made that I have been really proud of, and I think, if I were to, could I pick one? No, I will pick. There was a lady called Leader that I worked with, and that I hired at Founders Keepers. She had come from Netflix. She, if we talk about the proven track record, she hadn't worked in search before. So that bit was not proven. She had done lots of hiring. She knew how to look at what good looked like in terms of talent, and, but she was an example of somebody who, I think, when we looked at her against the first 3, the kind of the character, the intelligence, and the coachability, she just knocked those out the park. We were super aligned. And just to be clear on the character and the intelligence part of his principles, character is around sort of what you stand for, your why, and the alignment with the business on that sort of point. The intelligence is not necessarily IQ, which is obviously a thing that I think a lot of the time is focused on in hiring or in talent assessment, but it also looks at EQ and general sort of processing power, and kind of clock speed, if you like. So she was an example of those 3 things. I worked with an amazing lady called Malak at Page in Dubai when I was over there. She was an example of, she's gone on to be an entrepreneur, and she now has an amazing business, which we can talk about another time maybe. But she was an example of somebody who's just had incredible intelligence as well as character. People bought into her. She was real. I was really inspired by her, even though she was still at that point quite early stages of her career. And then I guess maybe Ross and John, who I work with today, but not in my kind of everyday team, although they both would probably argue differently. But John is my chairman, and then Ross is the co-founder of, as I said before, of our community. I consider myself to have hired them into my personal life team.
You hired them into your life.
I've hired them into my life, absolutely. And if there's anything that I've learned in my life, your experience of life is largely dependent on the people that you surround yourself with. And so I think those two people sort of working alongside me have been two of the best hires. And then actually, again, a slightly abstract one, a lady called Izzy Boscawen, who I've hired as a partner. So she did all of our brand and design work. I worked with her. She, previously as part of the Founders Forum group, and she's a polymath. So she's just one of these people that I don't know if there's anything she can't do, but she's just incredible. And having people like that with you is, the beauty of life. I think leverage all the individual skills that everyone has and strengths, and it's a pretty magical place.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We've actually we'll be hearing from Leader in a couple of weeks on the
Amazing.
show. So
Awesome.
she'll be
Love
sitting
that.
down with us.
Love that.
Thank you for that. Looking back over the hires that you've been involved with and the individuals and that you've helped to partner up with new roles, what do you think makes the difference between a good and a great hire? What are the characteristics that really move the needle in your mind?
I mean, so what's the difference between a good and a great hire in terms of the characteristics? I would come back to Jeremy Duggan's four, the principles that he uses and that I have since adopted. But if I were to go a little bit more specific, for me, it's the coachability and the application of the intelligence, if you like. So I think a good hire does the job that you've outlined. I think a great hire outlines new opportunities and brings value that you didn't even envisage yourself. So I think it's adding something that you didn't already have.
I totally agree on that. On those four areas, could you take us through those in a little bit more detail?
Mm.
Would love to really understand that.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I loved it, and I'm a sucker for anything that makes things simpler. I see the world in many many colors. So when I heard of those sort of four hiring principles, if you like, yeah, I mean, literally, I'm not even sure I heard it from Jeremy himself. Everybody that worked with him was like, do you understand that Jeremy uses these four principles for hiring? And yeah, so he would essentially look at these four things, which were character. So, multiverse is obviously a highly, for people that don't know, I mean, it's probably, as a business, I shouldn't go off on a sales pitch for them, but when I'm passionate about something, I'm very passionate, and they are a business that really speak to my heart, because they are essentially democratizing access to educational opportunities for people, or democratizing the access to opportunities from people from different educational backgrounds. So they're very mission driven, is the point. And so when he would look at, my understanding is when you look at character, from the way that he was thinking about it, was, they in particular would look very strongly at, what does this person stand for? What is their why? What is the drive and grit? And yeah, what's the drive and motivation in them? And that's something that I personally, especially in specializing in people leaders or human-centric leaders, I focus very heavily on people's whys and what's actually driving them. The intelligence, again, as I said earlier, is more about the kind of the roundedness of how they process information, how do they retain it, what's their IQ, what's their EQ, and how do they to use those together to make decisions, to influence, to create. The coachability, how do you take feedback, how do you learn, what's your adaptability, do you have a growth mindset, all of those sorts of things. And the track record then, and I think the point was always that is fourth in his list. The track record is, what have they done before? So,
And presumably that's less important the earlier in the career, but you might look for, I used to call it the high achiever pattern. And so sometimes it's in the career where you see people move and progress and take on more responsibility, but it could even be in side projects or university projects or extracurriculars, depending on where they are in their career.
yeah, exactly. I think so. I think track record is just what is the value that you have added that is tangible.
Yeah, nice. What's the most difficult role you've ever, or the most difficult role that's ever come across your desk, whether it was filled or not?
What is the most difficult role? Do you know what is the most difficult role that I have had? So I would say that, I guess it comes back to how you define difficult. I think all searches are unique, and that's what keeps me interested. And that's what means that 25 years on, I mean, not that I've been doing searches for 25 years, but I have for at least 15. Um, that's what keeps me constantly engaged, motivated, and like hugely passionate about that that role and the impact that it can have on businesses. I think the most challenging, if I can take it a slightly different way, I think that we learn the most from the most challenging experiences that we have. And so actually the most challenging experience that I've had in my career was more when I was faced with an opportunity where all the ingredients felt perfect for something that I believed in wholeheartedly. And I could see essentially what I learned in this situation, without going into too much detail because it would take a while. But what I learned is that as an individual, I'm somebody who likes to maximize things, love to collaborate. And sometimes you might get on really well with the people. You might have a lot of things that are aligned, and all the ingredients might be there for something that you really want to make happen. But sometimes people's priorities aren't exactly the same. And I think there was an important lesson for me to learn in my career, that you can't force everybody to see things your way, and you can't always maximize everything in the way that you want to, and that actually it's really important to get the balance right with how much time you spend on something. And also I remember around the time that I was in that period reading that Seth Godin book, The Dip, about like learning when to quit. And I think for someone like me, that's probably been the biggest lesson that I've needed to learn in my career, is that not everything is always perfect, and not always can your vision of perfect be the one. You got to sort of rechannel things sometimes, I think.
Fascinating. And sort of on that topic a little bit, when hires that you've been involved with in any capacity haven't worked out in the past, have there been any similar patterns? Are there any kind of observations or lessons that you've learned from those instances? I mean, I've been involved in numerous instances where candidates unfortunately haven't worked out for whatever reason, but I'd be curious to see your reflections.
So I probably answer this in two different ways. So when hires don't work out, and I think this is probably one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to hiring on the front end as well, is that 9 times out of 10, in my experience, and big reason why I set up Mazi was so that I could focus all of my time and energy with my team on helping founders and CEOs understand all of the data and evidence around what makes a CPO or VP people or number one people leader hire successful or not. Because, I think we all know that a lot of people, it's not, they need to see it and they need to be shown it as opposed to told it. So, I try to really pull out all of the kind of the data and insights. 9 times out of 10, people, leaders and leaders generally don't fail because they didn't have the right proven track record, or because they didn't have the right technical toolkit, or as I like to call it, hard skills. 9 times out of 10, the reason that they don't succeed in those roles is because the trust and respect was absent in the relationship between that CEO, that exec team, and the individual leader. So that's one thing that I think is really in why hires do or don't work out. And ensuring that that you really focus on onboarding so that people integrate really well, like setting them up for success. I don't think you can overestimate the importance of that. But then very specifically, in terms of going back to characteristics, I would say that if there's one thing that I were to test for that I would want to avoid hiring this quality, or I wouldn't call it a quality, is I guess you'd call it growth mindset, but people that seek to blame others first rather than looking at themselves and understanding how they could have affected this outcome, or how they could have made it better, or how they can learn from a mistake. I mean, I honestly love mistakes once. And I think when people are brave enough to, especially in interviews, if they are brave enough to share a mistake, but moreover, they are able to show what they've learned from that, and also that they thought about their own part in that scenario first, those for me are the gold nuggets. And the ones that don't do that are the ones that I would red flag.
Yeah, I find it very hard to pass a candidate through an interview that, when asked about a failure or a mistake, hasn't been able to give an answer.
Yeah.
It's, if you can't reflect, if you can't, and that's a question that everyone really is prepared for, but you wouldn't believe how many people actually just don't know how to deal with that question. The reality is you're not signaling strength, you're signaling self-awareness.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
yeah.
And also inner peace, confidence. I think, these are, again, egos can be difficult for people generally, but also they're very disruptive for teams. And if people don't have it, everybody has an ego, but not having enough of a handle on it is going to be a problem. So that's what yeah.
Couple of questions here, thinking about kind of the candidate side of the table. Obviously, as a search leader like yourself, you have to navigate both sides of the equation when it comes to hiring. What advice do you give to a candidate that's received a job offer?
Yeah. Okay. So what advice do I give to people that have received a job offer? I think um, probably two things. So first of all, be really, really clear. It is simple. Like, who are you? What do you bring? Why are you interested? And if you can ensure that you can connect the brief, or the role that you've got the offer for, with your own personal why, what, you know um the better. I think being able to make that assessment from your perspective, as well as just trusting them, is really, really important. I think a lot of people get offers and they get very sort of seduced by the fact that they've got an offer. And again, egos come into play. We feel very good about ourselves. We've got an offer, they want us. That's awesome. But actually, don't also have an appreciation for the fact that we're all human, including the people that are making the offer. And sometimes they might not have caught everything. And so I think it's really important to also have a critical eye on your assessment of whether this is the right opportunity. And so I think that is something that's really important when you're applying for a role. When you're receiving a job offer, I think you can also think about the scorecard approach. And I think a lot of people think about scorecards in the sense of that you should do that when you're the hiring manager. But I actually think that it's as important to do when you are the candidate. I think if you can really strip back with a clear focus, all of the excitement, all of the alert, all of the polish, and you can check against the risks of jumping into this opportunity just because of the buzz, not only will you actually ensure that the match is more likely to be successful, but you're also more likely to go into it for the right reasons, because nothing is ever perfect. But if you're doing something with your eyes wide open, and you've made a compromise willingly and knowingly, you're more likely to, or you're less likely to resent it, which again can start to cause issues later on. So I think kind of thinking critically, but also using a bit of a scorecard yourself as well, and forcing yourself to be honest with yourself.
100%. This is advice I've given before, but actually build yourself a scorecard. Like, write down the things: what matters to me, how much do they matter, where am I willing to flex, where am I not willing to flex.
Yeah.
I think it helps to bring clarity to the decision making process, because, as you say, you get an offer, you feel like a superstar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if they're doing their job right, you've probably met a lot of people, and you're beginning to build those relationships, and it's very easy to sort of be drawn in. And I think that's part of the reason, is that most candidates accept one of the first offers they receive.
Yeah.
And you've got to be really lucky to have met all the companies and seen all the opportunities, and just so happens that the first one that came along was the perfect fit for you. It's often not the case.
No, totally. And also, I think this is where sometimes the power dynamic can be an interesting one, because it is a two-way street. And whilst I think it's important to remember, when you are the candidate, that yes, ultimately it will be the company that decides whether they make you an offer. And if you're applying, then in that early stage, the power dynamic is probably more in their favor. But that does shift at the point that they make you the offer, because at that point they are telling you, we have concluded that we definitely want you. That doesn't then mean, as you say, that you just go, amazing, they want me, so now I'm going to go and join them. That's the point where you go, okay, I've also been doing my assessment through this point. Are they definitely also going to bring me all the things? I'm not a transactional person at all. Like, I think, advocate for the opposite of transactionalness in business, and this kind of more human approach. But if there is one thing that I have a bit of a more sort of transactional view on, is when you join a company, or when you create a relationship, there is a trade that is made, maybe sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously, but you are in relationships, in any relationships, you are on things that you both want or value.
The more clearly you can articulate what those things are, the more likely you are to get them.
And your point about the scorecards as well, when you were sort of saying that you've also been sort of recommending that people have a scorecard of their own when they're looking for their next role as well. I think the same applies, as we have both probably also advised founders and CEOs over the years, which is that you've also got to be really discerning about that scorecard. Like, the better the scorecard, the more considered, the more concise, and the more really on the bullseye, the better. If you just have a long list of all the things you might,
As we both know, crap in, crap out, right? And I
thank
think
you.
that, I often, I moved from sort of talent into more broader people because I realized that I was solving problems in talent that were made in people.
Yeah, totally.
And ultimately, how a role is scoped, how the problem is defined, how the organization understands its own need, for me, is likely the biggest determinant of success. And that's often where I try and spend most of my time with founders, to sort of say, okay, but what's different about your business in 12 months if you get this?
Well, I think we must have come to the same conclusion, Paddy. It's just that you decided to go into people and I decided to go into advocating for people leaders.
There we go. Last couple of questions from me. I guess, like, what do you wish, you work predominantly with founders, but what do you wish founders knew about your role and about recruitment in general that they might not know?
What do I wish that founders or partners that I work with knew about recruitment? So many things, so many things. But you know what? I guess it's similar to what we just said. I think you get out what you put in to everything, whether it's hiring, whether it's relationships, whether it's, your strategy, whatever we're talking about, you get out what you put in. There are no shortcuts. And I think that applies to the relationship that you have with a search firm. If you do your due diligence and you hire a partner, think about it. Make sure that you are actually, also, search partners aren't free. So, it would be sensible to also pick one that you are not only investing good money in, but ensure that the investment of money also is followed by an investment of time and interest and appetite. So if you're going to do it properly. If you don't want to do it properly, just don't do it. It's a waste of money and it's a waste of time. So I would love for people to, yeah, just, if you're going to do it properly. I'm really comfortable with the world where you don't do it. Not too many, that would be business. But
No, I hear you. All in. Let's
and I
do it or
also,
let's not.
again, I don't, again, it kind of comes back to the lesson that I learned. There is a world where everybody can be their own unique versions. Not everybody has to do the same thing. Not everyone has to take the same approach. Not everyone needs a people leader. Like, I say that as somebody that believes in people leadership. Definitely not everybody needs the same type of people leader, which is why I do what I do. But if you're going to do anything, just do it properly. And so I think, if that would be the first thing about what I would like them to know. It really is a case, though, of what you get. What you put in, you get out. So the more that you invest, and I think this applies actually also to candidates as well as, the hiring managers. For me personally, the more you use me, the more you will get out of me. If you, as a candidate, again, both parties, the more you tell me, the more I can pass on to the other side, the more that I can use that to enrich the process, to ensure the success. The more that you treat me as a trusted partner, the more quicker I will be, the more impactful I will be, and the same for my team, and the same, I'm sure, for every search partner. Hopefully, most search partners out there. I think that's really important. The only other thing I would say, which is really important, and I think this also probably comes back to my kind of core mission in life, or in my professional existence, if you like, but it's probably in my personal life as well. The little things matter. I really love the Maya Angelou quote. It's not just what you say, it's how you make people feel. I think that applies to hiring processes. Some of the best hiring processes I've seen, and there are some great founders out there that have just known to do this naturally. And I remember one in particular, and I won't embarrass him or the recipient by mentioning, but the exec team were at a retreat, or a sort of exec team offsite retreat, and they took a picture saying "wish you were here" with the person's name on, and sent it. It might not be for everybody. You should definitely do things that are authentic to you, and I'm sure there are certain founders out there that wouldn't do that. But I think if you create real connections, and you think about not just what you're saying, what the process is, what the strategy is, what the plan is, all of those things, but also just how you're making people feel and the experience that they're going through. I don't care who you are. Everybody likes to feel the way they want to feel. And that goes for the most technically minded, supposedly non-emotional people as well.
Yeah, everyone's out there looking for human connection.
They are. Even the ones that, and I've really, really seen this. I've worked with some very technically minded founders that don't have an interest in chewing the fat over people topics. And that is fine. I really believe that's fine. And I actually think it's far more helpful if you're honest about that as a founder. Um, but I do think we have to connect with people in an authentic way. And as a leader, I think you have to be true as a human, regardless of what type of human you might be and what your personal identity and character traits and strengths and things are, because you will get the people on your train with you on that journey, as opposed to just trying to be all things to all people, which I don't think works.
Yeah, 100%. I've always said that you want to be like a lighthouse. For
Yeah.
some people, you draw them in, and for some people, you repel them.
Yeah, 100%. If you're doing it right, you will not please everyone.
So what's next for you? If we were to meet again in 10 plus years from now, where is it that you want to be? Where do you want Mazi People to be? What is the kind of ambition for the next phase for you?
Where do I want to be? I am, Paddy, as you probably know at this point. I'm very enthusiastic about life. I'm very ambitious for what we can achieve in it together. I called my business Mazi because in Greek it means together, as you know. And I think we are going into a world where, I mean, my husband kindly pointed out to me that McKinsey said it much better than me recently when I told him about the McKinsey report on sort of people operating models that came out in February. That is a must read for anyone who hasn't. There were a couple of sound bites that were really powerful. And one of them for me was that as machines get better at being machines, humans need to get better at being human. I thought that that was the crux of what I have been sort of standing for and saying for quite a few years now. My husband told me that I hadn't said it quite like that. So I'm now going to use their words. But I guess what I would like to see and what I would like Mazi to help with is humans getting better at being human. I have to say, I'm quite excited at the moment, uh, not just because it's a sort of stimulating environment and there's lots to kind of work out. I do think we're going into a very different world. And I think this is, as somebody who has believed for a long time in the importance of being human in the world and in business, really crucially, I think that AI is forcing this point. And I can't even imagine what world we end up with if we don't get better at being human. But if we do, I'm very excited about it. And so I'm spending quite a lot of time at the moment, both, with my team, with people like you, with my friends and sort of contacts in the network, but also with our advisors for the collective, really trying to work out how do we create the leader that will, I mean, the best way I can put this is our kind of mission statement for the collective, which is also the same kind of mission statement for the search part of our business, is that we fundamentally believe that people leaders will be the catalyst for change in the future of work. However, I know that at the moment, what that leader looks like is changing. And I mean, I have thoughts at the moment as to whether we will, this is maybe a little bit provocative, but I don't know if we'll even be able to use the word chief people officer in the future, because I don't know if we need to come up with a new name for the role.
Why do you think that? Why do you think we might need a new name?
Because I think that I think that there are potentially too many historic
Too much
preconceptions.
baggage.
There's too much baggage. And I just wonder if we need to just like start again.
There
Not
we go.
not in the need and not in the skills and not in the strengths. And obviously I sit in a community of exceptional people leaders. But even that, I'm kind of veering away from people leader to human-centered leader, human-centric leader. I want humans to get better at being human, and I want them
Well,
to
it's super interesting, isn't it? The HR field for so many years, really until I would say the last 20 or so years, has largely been seen as a sort of second class citizen at the executive table, and one that is largely administrative and risk. And I think that there is this fundamental change underfoot where your human capital really becomes actually the differentiator for your business.
yeah.
And so in that case, does it make sense to have a school of leader, a type of leader that is largely administrative and risk, if actually the majority of your upside is contained there? And so I've been advocating for years for much more commercially minded people leadership. And I think that that is something that continues to need to be built. And I think that there are some great people coming through, and there's a new generation of leaders emerging. And again, I agree with you totally. They'll be very different the next 10 years than they were in the last 10.
Yeah. But I think, what it probably boils down to as well is, what is the definition of success for a people leader? And, when I boil that down, I think, what is the definition of emotional intelligence? And I think actually, even if you put that question to a lot of people, I'm not sure that the answer that you would get would be one that people wouldn't want to take a second go at if they were given a chance.
What's your answer to that question?
I and actually, I did ask somebody this earlier, and they said exactly the same as me, which I mean, not that I advocate for echo chambers, but it did make me smile. My definition of emotional intelligence is somebody that has the ability to put themselves into other people's shoes. Um, Regardless of what the outcome is that you're trying to achieve, regardless of anything else, I think fundamentally humans are self-centered. That is natural. And I think, again, we should be realistic about that. We see things through our lens because we are ourselves. However, I think the more emotionally intelligent someone is, the higher their EQ, the more that they are able to separate from themselves for a moment and put themselves into someone else's shoes to see the world through a different lens. And I think that with AI, and as McKinsey so nicely says it, as machines get better at being machines, and we will use those AI agents as our friends, and my goodness, they're wonderful friends because they are both, well, they're certainly smarter than me, and they are making me a better human because of their intelligence and speed and lack of emotion, crucially, which is so interesting. You know, that you don't have to worry about their feelings, which is, again, even for somebody who advocates for this kind of emotionally intelligent leadership and human-centric leadership, one of the things I love about my AI friends is that they don't get offended, and I don't have to worry about their feelings. And it's a very simple relationship, but it is a different relationship. And I think as they do that really well, the thing that we are left with is being better humans, and doing that in business is going to be what makes or breaks us. So I think, yeah, if I look at the future, I hope that, going back to your original question, Penny, I hope that Mazi has played a small part in helping businesses benefit from having better humans doing leadership.
That's a wonderful thought and wish to finish on. Sim, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed speaking with you today, and we're looking forward to having you back in the not too distant future.
Yeah, well, I will look forward to. I'm hoping that somebody's going to do a version of you doing this. Well, maybe not a version of you doing this.
We could get an AI to interview me, maybe.
There we go.
Maybe that could be next week's episode.
Get that on your
But Sim,
list.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.